Let me go to Mike McFaul. And Mike, obviously, you've got unverified channels that you're able to tap into at times. Let's start with the basics. Do we believe Prigozhin's dead?
Chuck, to the best of my knowledge, yes, it appears that he's dead. We need to remind everybody that he had a second plane. That second plane has landed in Moscow now. Various telegram channels of Russian control, operated by Russians in Moscow, are saying he's probably on that plane. So just by way of context, we don't know for sure. But I would say the reporting I'm seeing overwhelmingly said that he died in that crash. And let's call it for what it is.
Right.
It doesn't appear to be a crash. It appears that there was either an explosion on the plane or it was shot down.
Right.
And that, I think, has happened. So it looks like the Russian government allegedly assassinated Yevgeny Prigozhin. And I just added allegedly there because I also want us to be careful that we don't know exactly if Putin was the one that ordered this assassination. And we'll probably never know, Chuck, because he doesn't want us to know exactly when these kinds of things happen.
Let me bring Richard back. Richard, I think we have your audio now free and clear. Let's go back to what do we feel like we know and what do we think we'll be able to find out and confirm independently?
Well, what we can confirm independently might be very difficult. Reporting in Russia right now is extraordinarily complicated. Since the war in Ukraine has begun, the Russians have imposed extraordinary limitations on the ability of reporters to operate in that country. There are journalists in jail in Russia right now. But the Russians, according to their different state media organizations and state institutions, including the Civil Aviation Authority, have laid out a pretty clear picture. They say that this plane, a corporate jet, registered to Prigozhin, to the Wagner group, was leaving from Moscow on its way to St. Petersburg. That about 30 minutes into the flight, traveling at about 26,000 feet, suddenly it failed, and it failed catastrophically. And there is a video of this aircraft plummeting from the sky, falling like a stone in a way that does not suggest that anything normal or natural happened. It is twisting and spinning as it falls out of the sky and then crashes into the ground, into a fiery fireball because it is still full of fuel. So according to the Russians, he was manifested on this plane, and that the plane went down, and that there was a second plane in this convoy also carrying Wagner personnel, and that plane made it. So some Prigozhin supporters, and there are quite a few of them online, he became something of a hero when he launched this mutiny against the Kremlin. People who hated Vladimir Putin, who thought that Prigozhin was doing the right thing, calling out the crooks, calling out the criminals, challenging them on their own turf. They are still hopeful that maybe that he's on the second plane. That wouldn't put him out of danger if the Russians were trying to kill him, or that it's all a ruse, that he maybe registered his name on the plane, or that somebody else on the plane was using the name Yevgeny Prigozhin in an attempt to confuse the authorities. But that's all speculation. We know that this plane has crashed. We know that it was unsurvivable, and we know that the Russians say he was on it, and everything about it is incredibly suspicious. The way it went down, it fell down, that it was 2 months to the day since the uprising, since we know that Vladimir Putin pardoned Yevgeny Prigozhin in this very bizarre, also not very credible deal, that after Prigozhin marched his Wagner troops up toward Moscow and was not meeting much resistance, Prigozhin stopped and was suddenly offered this sweetheart deal to be pardoned and take his fighters to Belarus so that they could train a friendly allied government in counterterrorism tactics and commando tactics. That was allegedly the deal, but most people believed it was just a matter of time before Putin would get his revenge, that Putin needed a little bit of time to figure out who else was involved and sort out Prigozhin's business empire, understand them better, try and take it over before eliminating this rival.
Mike McFaul, the part that I'm struggling to believe here is that the idea that Prigozhin was in Moscow. Like that doesn't seem like to be the smartest location to be hanging out, given the situation he created for himself. Are you surprised that he was living in Russia?
Yes, in a couple of respects. And I'm glad you're asking this, Chuck, because now that we know he's been killed, we've all jumped to the conclusion that it was a matter of time. I said that too many times. But there is a lot of weird things that happened between the mutiny and today. He cut a deal. Why did he cut a deal? Then he went to Belarus. Everything seemed fine. Then he was in St. Petersburg, right next to President Putin, when President Putin was holding a summit with African leaders, and he had his own kind of bilats, on the sidelines of that summit, and they were all going over to see Mr. Prigozhin. Why didn't they arrest him then? Why didn't they put a bullet in his head then? If this was all such a fait accompli, it was just a matter of time. Why did they have to do something so dramatic that we're all watching? Why didn't they arrest him? So there's a lot of strange questions here. Obviously, Prigozhin was lulled into believing that he and Putin were good. And otherwise he wouldn't have been doing all those things. It sounds like he miscalculated, but there's a lot I want to know, including, was Putin the guy behind this alleged assassination attempt?
Well, one more. Let me throw something more into the timeline here. Yesterday, we get that video of Prigozhin in Africa. This morning, one of the generals he worked with was officially sort of removed from their job. And all of a sudden, a few hours later, this plane crashes or in a fiery ball. I mean, it's hard to see that any of that stuff isn't it can't be coincidental.
Well, I'd say a couple of things. First, to the point of why he let him run around for a while and then maybe killed him. And I just want to keep emphasizing, I do not know that Vladimir Putin ordered the assassination of Prigozhin. That hasn't been confirmed. It probably never will be. But just for a minute, let's assume that's true. I think he let this go on because he wanted to use this moment to find out who were these traitors inside his government. Remember what Richard said. Richard said that Prigozhin was popular. I think that's very important for Americans to understand.
He could be a martyr, a thug to me, right?
He's inside Russia with the soldiers. He's a thug. He's a criminal. He's a terrorist. I have no, I'm glad to see him off the field. And believe me, Ukrainians are too. But within the armed forces, within the Russians, you were just showing some footage from Rostov when he's leaving. People are getting selfies with him. That made it more difficult for Putin to take him out right away. And I'm not convinced that those problems are over just because this has happened today.
Richard, what does this mean for these African countries that the Wagner Group has become their essentially mercenary force?
So you mentioned it just in your conversation right now. For the last several months, Putin has spent a lot of time focusing on Africa. He had this Africa summit. He was talking about Africa just the other day at the BRIC summit. So since this uprising, this mutiny happened, and in a way, Vladimir Putin subcontracted out Africa to the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group was the forward operations arm of the Kremlin, military and political, in Africa. I saw it myself in the Central African Republic. The embassy there was Wagner. It was Wagner that was on patrol in the streets. I asked the government about it. I asked the president. He said, well, we needed security protection. We wanted Russian security protection, and they sent Wagner, and that's up to Moscow to send whoever they want to. So after this mutiny, we saw Putin focusing a lot on Russia, trying to reestablish those relationships, trying to make them more official, make them more officially part of the Kremlin and not subcontracted out to Wagner. And it seems that perhaps...
Oh, man. Well, Richard, you're not going to like this. We lost your audio again, and now you've just frozen on camera as well. Very quickly, Mike McFaul, it guarantees we're going to hear from the rest of the Republican candidates about where they stand on Putin tonight. As somebody just texted me, This is Putin, an odd way for Putin to ensure he gets into the debate questions tonight.
Yeah, and it's too bad that one of those presidential candidates won't be there to talk about it, the one who has the closest relationship to Mr. Putin. That's it.
Yeah.
I hope that somebody will ask him eventually what he thinks as well.
And it'll be interesting to see how everybody else dances around this tonight. Mike McFaul,
Yes.
Richard Engel, I know we're trying to, always tough sometimes, tech on the road. Thank you both.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.